Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We begin with the politics lead today, and the White House hammered this afternoon by questions about President Trump's past alleged sexual misconduct. Moments ago, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders suggested there is a distinction between accusations against Senator Al Franken and those against the president because Franken has admitted wrongdoing and the president has not. Asked if there should be an investigation into the Trump accusations, Sanders said that they've been addressed and the American people, quote, spoke loud and clear when they elected President Trump. We're in the middle of a maelstrom of sexual harassment and assault allegations across this nation, and in many ways, for the first time, men facing actual consequences for this abhorrent behavior. Republican U.S. Senate candidate Roy Moore of Alabama being one of the most prominent in recent weeks, accused not only of targeting teens for intimate relations when he was in his 30s, but also of sexual abuse of girls as young as 14 and 16. Now, the White House had been diligently keeping President Trump from weighing in on Moore, trying to thread the needle by saying he found the charges disturbing, but assiduously avoiding saying whether he believed any of the women. This, of course, given the president's own obvious vulnerabilities regarding women who have made accusations. It was an attempt to avoid this very segment that I'm doing right now. But apparently President Trump could not resist after Democratic Senator Al Franken found himself apologizing after a woman accused him of kissing and groping her without her consent. The president tweeting in response, quote, "The Al Frankenstein picture is really bad. Speaks 1,000 words. Where do his hands go in pictures 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 while she sleeps?" And to think that just last week he was lecturing anyone who would listen about sexual harassment and respect for women, unquote. Now, first of all, in point of fact, no one has alleged that there are any other photographs. But more importantly, this, of course, raises an obvious point. In Trump's world, we're supposed to believe the very compelling claims of Leanne Tweeden, to whom we spoke extensively on this show yesterday. But we are not supposed to believe these women, at least 12 women, who have brought forward claims on the record about President Trump's past behavior, alleging actions ranging from sexual harassment to sexual misconduct to, in some cases, sexual assault, spanning the 1980s to the 2000s. Jessica Drake said in a press conference that Donald Trump hugged her, kissed her without consent, and offered her money to go out with him. Summer Zervos, a contestant on The Apprentice, accused President Trump of harassing her on multiple occasions, including kissing her, quote, very aggressively and placing his hand on her chest without her consent. Jessica Leeds told the New York Times that during a flight he sat next to her, lifted the armrest, and began to grab her breasts and put his hands up her skirt. Mindy McGillivray told the Palm Beach Post that Trump groped her at Mar-a-Lago. Quote, "I was startled. I jumped," she said. Rachel Crooks, who worked in the Trump Tower, told the New York Times that Trump kissed her on the cheeks and her mouth without consent. People magazine Natasha Stoynoff claims Donald Trump pushed her against a wall and forced his tongue down her throat. A former Miss Utah, Temple Taggart, claims Mr. Trump gave her a non-consensual embrace and kissed her on the lips during a pageant rehearsal against her wishes and repeated the behavior later at a Trump Tower meeting. Kristen Anderson says in a crowded Manhattan club, Donald Trump reached up her miniskirt and touched her genitals through her underwear. Kathy Heller claims that President Trump forcibly kissed her at a Mother's Day brunch at Mar-a-Lago. Former Miss Finland, Nini Laaksonen, said Mr. Trump grabbed her buttocks before a joint appearance on The Late Show. Karina Virginia said in a press conference that President Trump touched the side of her breasts before allegedly asking, "Don't you know who I am?" And Jill Harth says Mr. Trump made unwanted sexual advances toward her, including groping her under her skirt on 2 different occasions. Now, the Trump campaign issued statements denying those claims. And of course, then candidate Trump himself had this to say.
Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. The events never happened. Never. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
Needless to say, President Trump has filed exactly 0 lawsuits against any of his accusers. In fact, the only lawsuit filed in all of this has been from one of those accusers, Summer Zervos, for defamation of her character, a suit against him. A few weeks ago, when the accusations against Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein were made public, the president said he was, quote, not surprised. In response, the White House was asked about its position regarding Mr. Trump's many accusers. And the White House press secretary, whose salary you taxpayers pay, stood by that line while standing at the podium from the People's House saying, all these women are liars.
Is the official White House position that all of these women are lying?
Yeah, we've been clear on that from the beginning, and the president's spoken on it.
While President Trump has yet to weigh in on whether he believes any of the 7 women who claim that Roy Moore in his 30s pursued intimate relations with them when they were in high school, including one who says he had sexual contact with her when she was 14, and another who says he sexually assaulted her when she was 16. That didn't apply to presidential daughter Ivanka Trump. Ivanka Trump said about U.S. Senate candidate Roy Moore, quote, there's a special place in hell for people who prey on children. I've yet to see a valid explanation, and I have no reason to doubt the victims' accounts. No reason to doubt the victims' accounts, which again raises the question for Ivanka Trump and for Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Speaker of the House Paul Ryan for that matter. Why do you believe the Roy Moore accusers, but you do not believe those who accuse Donald Trump? I mean, even beyond all of these accounts shared by women who came forward on the record at quite a lot of risk to share their grims and do anything. You can do anything. You can do anything except criticize other alleged offenders without folks like us pointing out the rank hypocrisy of it. Just a little note, people in glass White Houses shouldn't throw stones. CNN Washington correspondent Ryan Nobles has more from the White House now. And Ryan, how is the White House responding to all these quite legitimate questions about the president and his response to Al Franken, considering his own history?
Well, Jake, as you point out, the fact that the president waited less than 12 hours to weigh in on the allegations against Al Franken has really opened the White House up to a level of criticism on 2 different fronts. Of course, there is the issue with Roy Moore, the Republican Senate candidate in Alabama, who is facing accusations of sexual impropriety. But then there are the president's accusers as well, as you accurately lay out. 12 different women who have accused the president of sexual impropriety at different points. Well, Sarah Sanders was asked about that very specifically today during the White House press briefing, and this was her response.
Senator Franken has admitted wrongdoing and the president hasn't. I think that's a very clear distinction.
So the distinction there that Senator Franken has admitted his wrongdoing and the president hasn't. As it relates to the situation in Alabama, the president has yet to weigh in on this hardly at all. He talked about it very briefly during his trip to Asia, said he didn't have time to read in on the issue, but would talk about it more when he got back to Washington. He has yet to do that. And Sarah Sanders has repeatedly deflected questions about it, not talking about the specifics at all. Well, Sarah Murray today tried to press Sarah Sanders on that, specifically asking about what the president thinks about the victims. Take a listen.
Can you tell us whether the president believes the women who are making these allegations against Roy Moore, and would he be willing to ask the Alabama governor to delay the election or take a step like that to try to intervene in this electoral process in Alabama?
The president certainly finds the allegations extremely troubling, as I stated yesterday, and he feels like it's up to the governor and the people in the state of Alabama to make a determination on whether or not they delay that election or whether or not they support and vote for Roy Moore.
And that's an important distinction I want to point out, Jake. We know that the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has sent a memo to the White House, and one of the options in that memo is how to deal with the situation in Alabama, is trying to convince the governor there to delay the election. Today, Sarah Sanders saying that it is up to the governor to make that decision. So far, Kay Ivey has said that she is not inclined to make that choice, but at this point, it still remains a possibility. Jake?
All right, Ryan Nobles at the White House for us. Thank you so much. My panel's with me to break this all down. I want to start with you, Kirsten Powers. I thought that was a very interesting sentence construct by Sarah Sanders. Al Franken has admitted wrongdoing, the president hasn't. Not Al Franken did something wrong and the president didn't.
Yes.
But I mean, I don't think she meant it this way, at least not consciously. But she's saying, well, he admitted it, and President Trump hasn't admitted it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this creates kind of a conundrum, right? What do you do with same thing with a Roy Moore, who says he didn't do it, and so therefore people say, well, I don't really have to hold him accountable, but we do have to hold Al Franken accountable. Now, Al Franken, the other thing I want to say, though, people are saying, well, Al Franken admitted it. Well, it's a picture. He doesn't really, he doesn't get extra credit for admitting something that we have photographed photographic evidence of. And in fact, he actually didn't really admit the part of
not the kiss,
the kissing.
Kiss,
and he actually has, even in his sort of admission, he's sort of raising questions about it. It wasn't really what he intended. And she's saying, no, actually, you grabbed me and you kissed me and you sexually assaulted me. So he actually hasn't really completely admitted it.
Interesting. Caitlin, so interesting. President Trump's advisors, I know, telling him, don't weigh in on the Roy Moore affair, don't weigh in on the Roy Moore affair, knowing that the moment he did, all the questions would be, just like the segment I just did, why believe these accusers and not believe these accusers? But he just couldn't help himself with Al Franken.
Right. He's like held off so much on commenting on Roy Moore. He's been asked about it tirelessly during his entire trip in Asia. The only thing they've said about it is the statement that Sarah Sanders put out that said that the allegations were very troubling and if true, he should step aside.
If true.
And then the president said that. And right. And it's how do you determine if these allegations are true? Like what proof does the White House want beyond these women going on the record and saying that this happened to them because of Roy Moore? And Sarah Sanders suggested yesterday that it should go to court. But this election is less than a month away at this point. So it's not clear what proof they would want from this. But right, the president, of course, just 12 hours after the Al Franken news was published, he commented on it. Meanwhile, it's been over a week since the Roy Moore news broke, and he has not said a word about it. So it really just goes to show when it's a Democrat, the president is more than happy to comment on it. But when it's Roy Moore, the people who voted for him are going to support, then he doesn't want to say a word about it.
Nia Malika, we're going to get to you in just 1 second. I have to squeeze in a commercial here. We got a lot more to talk about. Stick around about President Trump's response to the Franken allegations coming up. Stay with us.
The Lead with Jake.
We're back with our politics lead. Let's continue the conversation with my panel. Nia, I want to play for you some sound from Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who also talked about how, as a young wife of a congressman or girlfriend of a congressman in 1980, 81, somewhere in there, she also was sexually assaulted or harassed. Listen to what she had to say.
I don't think it's the watershed moment that so many people think it is, because I still think that for too many, there are consequences in naming who the person is. And what we have to do is change the culture.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that people are acting like everything's changing now.
Changed,
Debbie Dingell, Congresswoman Dingell, suspicious of that. Skeptical.
I think she's right to be skeptical. I mean, if you see what has happened with the women who have come out, even with the Roy Moore situation, they have been threatened, they have been criticized, they have been targeted, they have not been believed. It was a watershed moment, I think, for Mitch McConnell to come out and say that he did believe the women. That simple phrase, I believe the women, is something we haven't heard. We didn't hear it with Bill Clinton, those accusers. You see a bit of a reckoning among Democrats having to deal with what happened with those women, Monica Lewinsky, Juanita Broderick, who weren't believed and were very much dismissed, right, as being sort of nutty and a little bit slutty, I think was one of the phrases used.
That was Anita Hill.
Anita Hill. And Anita Hill, even she wasn't necessarily believed either by a lot of folks when she came forward against Clarence Thomas. So I think she's right to be skeptical of this. I think people want it to be a watershed moment. People want women to feel like they can come forward and be honest about what happened and name names, but at what cost? And there's still a cost.
To follow up on that, we've got all these accusations against Roy Moore and teenagers who were as young as 14 years old. Meanwhile, we have the governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, who says she doesn't have any reason to not believe these women and their accusations against him, but she's still going to vote for Roy Moore on December 12th. So what
because
is that
she
going
wants
to say?
because she wants a Republican in that seat.
Exactly. So these women come out and they say these things, they go on the record, and then they're trashed. And then the person that they're saying that did all this to them is still going to be elected to the Alabama Senate if the governor of Alabama has anything to do with it.
But that's one of the problems of why this also could not be a watershed moment in the political world, is because you watch what happens. And I think we talk a lot about the hypocrisy of the Trump supporters. There's a lot of hypocrisy on the other side as well. I'm watching people on Twitter today kind of scurrying around, calling what, Al Franken did a prank or trying to make it, there was a piece in the Washington Post by a feminist professor basically saying, well, it was only one woman. So if more women come out where he's been accused of sexual assault, then maybe we have to look at it. But so basically, if you're a Democrat, it's only one sexual assault, and we kind of, we'll kind of look the other way and you start to see the same kind of arguments you saw with Bill Clinton, because we need somebody who's looking out for women's rights and somebody who's going to protect the right to choose, and you start to see the same thing playing out over again.
And you hear this from Trump supporters also. They say Democrats You're the ones that changed the culture by accepting this from Bill Clinton. We're just following your lead. They blame it on Democrats for doing that. But we are seeing something of a reckoning. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand saying in an interview with the New York Times, and we'll talk more about this later in the show, but saying in the interview with the New York Times that Bill Clinton should have resigned.
Yeah, I mean, which was a major thing for her to say. I mean, it's sort of belatedly saying it as the Clintons are really riding off into the sunset in terms of their political influence and their political aspirations. I don't think Bill Clinton's ever going to run for office. I don't think Hillary Clinton is either. So it's sort of easier for them to say that at this point. I think the question will be, is this going to be a new litmus test for Democrats? Gillibrand might very well run for office, president in 2020. She's on sort of the long list of Democrats looking at that. But it's also, if she thinks that Clinton should have resigned, then should Franken resign too at this point, right? Because essentially it's the same kind of accusation being made. So I think that'll be a question. And we'll see, can Franken hang on? You've seen Democrats out there saying, it's going to be an ethics investigation, but we'll see what happens with him.
Stick around. We got a lot more to talk about. She's standing by her man and says her husband isn't going anywhere. Now Roy Moore's wife is speaking out as the Senate Majority Leader, looking for a possible way out of the Alabama mess. Stick with us. And we're back with the politics lead today. We've just learned that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is putting together a pitch to the White House to try to stop Roy Moore's chances of winning the Alabama Senate race, including potential legal action to stop the December 12th special election. Meanwhile, Moore himself keeps denying the allegations from the 7 Alabama women who say that he pursued relationships with them when he was in his 30s and they were in high school, not to mention the woman who claims he sexually abused her when she was 14 and another who says he sexually assaulted her when she was 16. Today, Moore showcased a number of women who support him, led by his wife, insisting that the sexual abuse allegations against him are all false. CNN's Kyung La is live for us right now in Gadsden, Alabama. And Kyung, McConnell's pitch to the president might do little to pressure the Alabama governor who just said today even she is still planning on voting for Roy Moore.
Well, and to top that, a senior administration official tells our Jeremy Diamond that it's very unlikely that the president would get involved at this point anyway, because the president does not want to be seen as telling Alabama what to do. Now, meanwhile, here in Alabama, the Moore campaign is taking a decisive step towards Trump. Here's what Moore's wife had to say to reporters.
All of the very same people who were attacking President Trump are also attacking us. I personally think he owes us a thank you. Have you noticed you're not hearing too much about Russia?
And that's a direct pitch to Trump voters who are very much seen as Moore supporters energized into the polls, Jake.
And Kyung, you also spent the day talking to voters in Alabama. What are you hearing from them?
We've spent a good part of this week going from the rural areas to the city areas, talking to voters, and you are starting to see some movement, not necessarily across party lines, though. I want you to listen to this lifelong Republican.
Does it concern you enough to not vote for him, considering that some of these women were 14, 16 years old?
Yes. That's probably the reason why I probably won't vote.
He just won't vote, but he absolutely, Jake says, he will not vote Democrat. Jake?
All right, Kyung La in Gadsden, Alabama, thanks so much. As the Russia investigation focuses on the White House, President Trump is dipping into his own bank account. That story's next. And we're back with some breaking news in the Russia investigation. Special counsel Robert Mueller wants to talk to the music publicist who set up the now infamous meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and that Russian lawyer in 2016. It comes as the Judiciary Committee in the Senate is demanding that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and top advisor, turn over documents related to emails about WikiLeaks and also a, quote, Russian backdoor overture. CNN Justice correspondent Pamela Brown joins me now. Pamela, what specifically is Mueller looking for?
Well, and also you have Mueller's team and then you have the team on the Hill Judiciary Committee. They released a laundry list of things they're looking for. So now President Trump's son-in-law, senior advisor Jared Kushner, is under scrutiny as these lawmakers on Capitol Hill reveal he failed to disclose numerous key documents related to the Russia investigation. They include communications related to Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, including documents about his firing and his registration as a foreign agent, documents about Jared Kushner's security clearance. You'll recall he had to update that clearance form 3 times to include his meetings with foreign entities, including Russians. The committee also asking for an email chain that we know involved Donald Trump Jr. related to his direct messages with WikiLeaks, in which Kushner then forwarded to Hope Hicks. The committee said Kushner didn't hand that over, along with communications with Sergei Milian. He's a Russian businessman who the Washington Post says was a source for the Trump-Russia dossier. The committee says Kushner was copied on some of those emails with Milian, and they want documents about attempts to establish a backdoor line of communication with Russians and a dinner invite from September of 2016. And they're also asking for phone records as well that have shown up in documents others have provided the committee. We did receive a statement from Kushner's attorney, which says in part, we provided the Judiciary Committee with all relevant documents that had to do with Mr. Kushner's calls, contacts, or meetings with Russians during the campaign and transition, which was the request. It's worth noting here, Jake, that others were given the same request, including Don Jr. It appears they all handed over all these documents, which allowed the committee to realize that Jared Kushner didn't hand everything over that they were looking for.
He's not exactly establishing himself as someone with a reputation for disclosing everything when he
Being
could.
transparent.
Now, tell me more about Special Counsel Mueller issuing a subpoena to the Trump campaign for more documents. What exactly is Mueller looking for?
So apparently a source tells my colleague Gloria Borger that they've expanded the search terms in the subpoena asking for more documents. And we're told that it could take the campaign months to actually turn over these documents because the request is so wide ranging. We should note here, Jake, that subpoenas are not unusual. Mueller has issued a lot of subpoenas, but clearly what the campaign has turned over so far wasn't satisfactory to the Mueller team, and it doesn't answer all of their questions as part of the Russia investigation.
All right, Pamela Brown, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Also in politics today, as the White House applauds today the Senate Finance Committee for clearing a major hurdle on the Republican tax bill, we're examining what might be a false impression of the tax cuts Republicans are so eager to pass. Their goal, stay on budget, add no more than a mere $1.5 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. And that may mean that promised tax cuts won't last forever. In fact, most of the individual tax cuts in the Senate Republican tax bill include a sunset provision. They will expire in 2025. And as history has taught us, no majority party down the road is going to let rates go up on their watch. CNN's Brianna Keeler joins me now. Brianna, aren't Republicans essentially kicking the can down the road and probably raising the deficit at the same time? Two things that they constantly criticize Democrats for doing?
Yes, but Republicans, Jake, want to get this done. They need and they want a win ahead of a crucial midterm election. But their tax plans are propped up by, frankly, dishonest math. They violate the very promise that the GOP has made time and time again, that they will not saddle future generations with more debt.
Republicans are hard at work trying to overhaul the tax system.
We're working to give the American people a giant tax cut for Christmas.
And it has a giant price tag, $1.5 trillion over 10 years. Even as Republicans argue questionably that economic growth will help cancel out the big addition to the national debt, it's a costly plan for Republicans like House Speaker Paul Ryan, who have built their brand on fiscal conservatism.
We face a crushing burden of debt, which will take down our economy.
That was back in 2011 when Ryan was House Budget Chairman. In 2013, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called the debt and deficit
the transcendent issue of our era. Until we fix that problem, we can't fix America.
But now Republicans are championing a plan that many deficit hawks say is anything but fiscally responsible. The tax plan's $1.5 trillion price tag is a lowball figure. It's the price tag they need to come under in order to use special Senate rules requiring them to need only 51 votes. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a fiscally conservative advocacy group, puts the real cost at $2.2 trillion.
There are a lot of gimmicks they're slipping into the bill to make the costs look less than they actually are.
Here's one major gimmick. While the corporate tax cuts would be permanent, the tax cuts for American taxpayers would expire after 10 years, on paper anyway, even though it's expected Congress would ultimately just make the cuts permanent. That fishy math allows Republicans to claim a smaller price tag.
On one hand, they're saying, sure, there's all these expiring tax breaks, but don't worry, we fully intend to extend them and you won't have to worry about your taxes going up. And on the other hand, they're saying, don't worry about the cost of the bill. Sure, we're borrowing $1.5 trillion, which I would say everybody should be worrying about, but we're not going beyond that limit, when really they are.
Some Republicans say they are not quite as committed to this charade, that the bill won't add more than $1.5 trillion to the deficit, such as retiring Senator Bob Corker.
If I believe it's going to add the deficit, I'm not going to vote for it.
Critics say it will add significantly to the deficit, just as the Bush tax cuts did, exactly what Republicans warned against in the past.
It is unconscionable to leave the next generation with a crushing burden of debt and a nation in decline. Washington's obsession with the next election has come at the expense of the next generation.
There's also a dubious promise that the White House is making about the tax overhaul. The congressional liaison for the White House, Mark Short, saying that every income bracket will see a decrease in taxes and every working family will see a decrease as well. That's not fully true. Independent analysis shows that in the long term, American families earning less than $75,000 a year are, over time, going to pay more in taxes, Jake.
All right, Brianna Keeler, thank you so much. Our panel returns to talk about all this news and more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We're back with our politics lead and our great panel. I want to read for you a tweet from the Reverend Franklin Graham. He said, quote, "The hypocrisy of Washington has no bounds. So many denouncing Roy Moore when they are guilty of doing much worse than what he has been accused of supposedly doing. Shame on those hypocrites." Now, just to remind people, he's accused of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. So what is he talking about?
I don't know. That doesn't make any sense. But this is the game that everyone's playing. It's the pointing the hypocrisy finger back and forth at each other.
And they're both right.
Yeah. And both sides are being hypocritical. And it's just sort of incredible watching a bunch of hypocrites accuse each other of hypocrisy. There's hardly anybody who is consistently calling out both sides when they do something. And that's the problem. This really should not be a political weapon. It should be, if you sexually assault a woman, regardless of your political position on any issue, it should be wrong. But that's not what happens. It becomes immediately a way for one side to beat the other side over the head.
And yet we've seen this reckoning that the left and Democrats have been making with the Bill Clinton era in the last few weeks because of this exact inconsistency. Take a listen to Kirsten Gillibrand, the Democratic senator from New York, who has campaigned with both Bill and Hillary Clinton. I think she was a finance chair of the Hillary Clinton campaign. Listen to her talking to the New York Times.
Your view that President Clinton should have stepped down at that time, given the allegations?
Yes, I think that is the appropriate response.
Now, the response from longtime Clinton aide Philippe Reines on Twitter, quote, "Over 20 years, speaking to Kirsten Gillibrand, you took the Clintons' endorsements, money, and seat. Hypocrite. Interesting strategy for 2020 primaries. Best of luck." So, you know, it's not easy, I think, for people to burst out of the hypocrisy shell.
No, it's certainly nice calling it Hillary Clinton's seat, saying she took it. And I thought Gillibrand's comment was pretty stunning. We haven't seen something like that from someone like that who has been pretty close with the Clintons before. And I think it's something that other Democrats should be asked if they agree with her. And I think that's something that's going to come into play more and more often as we're seeing, you know, this watershed moment of all these sexual assault allegations. And people are going to go back to reevaluate how they covered this whenever it was the Bill Clinton era, when all of that happened, and how they handled that and who they focused on. If they focused on maybe he should step down, he should apologize, or did they, you know, focus on demonizing his accusers?
Yeah. I want to take issue, respectfully, of course, with something you said, Nia. I think, obviously, if Hillary Clinton were president right now, that would be a much gutsier thing, what Kirsten Gillibrand said. But I don't think it's fair to say that it comes at no price to make that comment, because Bill and Hillary Clinton remain incredibly popular with the Democratic Party, with Democratic voters, with fundraisers. You know, barring some unforeseen circumstance, they're still going to raise a ton of money for Democrats in 2018 and 2020. So there is a price for that, I think.
You know, I'm not really sure. I don't know. I mean, if you look at 2018, for instance, how many people are going to want to have Bill Clinton out on the stump for them? How many people are going to want to have Hillary Clinton out on the stump for them? I don't think that many. I mean, I could be wrong, particularly now at this point. You know, I think it's
You mean post-sexual harassment?
Right, post-sexual harassment, post-loss, right? I mean, people are moving on from the Clinton era. Donna Brazile, for instance, I think that's in some ways, there has been a signal from many Democrats that they are are very willing and want to move on from the Clinton era. And I think this was part of that. She might have problems now with Clinton donors because they are certainly a part of the kind of Democratic machine, and she might have alienated some of those folks. But at this point, you know, I think people are seeing less and less the value of having kind of the Clinton imprimatur in terms of their political futures. And so that's why I think, you know, it would have been harder and very hard for her to do that a year ago, 2 years ago. You know, the question is, did she give up money that she helped raise, you know, that Clinton helped her raise or anything like that? It's also like she's also not saying that Democrats themselves should have behaved differently, right? She's saying Bill Clinton should have resigned. Should all of those Democrats voted for his impeachment?
Kirsten?
I think that she's speaking for a lot of Democrats who have long had anger towards the Clintons for having to basically stay silent or, you know, and not be critical of this kind of behavior and look like hypocrites. Now, people made a choice to do that, but look, even at the time, people were very, very angry when it happened, you know, with the Monica Lewinsky situation and him lying. And we're not even getting into, she's just talking about Lewinsky. We're not even getting into the other accusations against him, Juanita Broaddrick, Kathleen
sexual
Willey,
assault,
all these
rape,
other things.
sexual
yes,
harassment.
and so and this has been something that's been hanging over the Democratic Party for the last 20 plus years. And honestly, you know, Bill Clinton should also have to come out and apologize and have some sort of reckoning at some point, you know, for the accusations against him. If we are supposed to believe every woman that makes an accusation, then that would still be true of Juanita Broaddrick and Kathleen Willey and Paula Jones. And instead we're sort of told, well, those, you know, that didn't happen, let's not pay attention.
Gillibrand is giving all the money that Al Franken raised for her from his PAC to a charity that combats sexual assault and rape in the military. But I do wonder, Caitlin, do you think that Donald Trump is almost an umbrella over him in the sense that you could see a Democrat arguing, well, why should Al Franken have to resign when Donald Trump's in the White House?
Well, that's where this hypocrisy thing comes into play, because if you're calling on Roy Moore to be expelled if he makes it into the Senate, then are you also going to call on Al Franken to step down? And there's a very good chance Donald Trump was accused of sexual assault and he made it into the White House. There's a very good chance that in 1 month, Al Franken is still a senator and Roy Moore has become a senator. So it really could be an umbrella to where it's, they have to live up to what they're saying. If they call for one of these people to step down, then they also have to call for Al Franken to step down.
We can't even just draw a line on under 18. That can't even be a line, I suppose.
I think that's a dangerous.
I mean, it is different, right? I mean, if you were accused of assaulting a 14-year-old, 16-year-old, you know, trolling the malls in search for young women, it is, I think, legally different. And I think for a lot of people, it's of, you know, kind of a severity that is a little bit different from what others have been accused of.
Kirsten, Caitlin, Nia, thank you so much. Appreciate it. He grabbed a suicidal terrorist wearing a bomb, took the blast himself to save his fellow soldiers. A Medal of Honor recipient opens up next about his heroic act. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're going to end today with a remarkable tale of battlefield bravery. Army Captain Flo Groberg was on patrol in Afghanistan back in August 2012 when he noticed a suspicious man approaching. Quickly realizing that the man was a suicide bomber, Captain Groberg ran over and hugged the terrorist who was wearing the bomb, shielding his comrades from the blast. 4 people were killed that day, and Groberg sustained serious injuries. But if not for his heroism, many more lives would have been lost. This week marks the 2-year anniversary of President Obama awarding Groberg the Congressional Medal of Honor, the military's highest recognition of valor. Captain Groberg writes about his experiences in a new book titled 8 Seconds of Courage. Joining me now is retired Army Captain Flo Groberg. Captain Groberg, thanks so much for being here, and thank you, more importantly, for your amazing service to the nation.
Thanks for having me.
So the book starts, your mother's family is originally from Algeria, and the book starts with you talking about your beloved uncle Abdou, who was killed in Algeria fighting radical Islamic terrorists. And he inspired you. Tell us about him.
So my uncle was my rock star as a child, and he was a preacher of the Muslim faith. He was an imam. And when the GIA, the terrorist organization, came in the late 80s, early 90s, he didn't believe that that was the right way of serving his country anymore, which was, you know, to preach, because these individuals came out there and they're telling a false story of his faith. And he realized that he needed to stand up against such, you know, hatred. That's how he saw it. And he enlisted in the Army.
And after 9/11, you decided to do the same. You were awarded the Medal of Honor for hugging a suicide bomber in Afghanistan to protect the people around you, to protect your battle buddies. How often do you think about that day? And what do you think about when you think about it?
I think about Command Sergeant Griffin, Major Gray, Major Kennedy, and State Department USAID, Reggie Abdel Fattah.
Those are the guys that didn't make it.
Those are the guys that didn't come home on that day. I wear the bracelet that I have here that, look at this right here. It's a constant reminder. So you ask me how often I think about it every single day. I have a responsibility to make sure that I live my life to the best of my ability and that I make something of myself and so that I can honor them and the Gold Star families, their families.
You saved countless lives, though. Obviously, I understand that you would feel bad about the ones that were not saved, but you saved countless lives.
You know, it was a team effort. I think every single individual that was part of that patrol played a very important part in terms of doing our job and saving each other. I was the closest to the bomber, and so I had the most direct path towards the suicide bomber. And I just did my job, just like Mahoney did his job, just like Brink did his job, Ochar did his job, Balderrama did his job, and Secor did his job. That was our duties.
You went through a rough time, both physically and emotionally, after the incident, understandably. You write very movingly in the book about your encounter with a quadruple amputee, Staff Sergeant Travis Mills, upon your return to the States at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Tell us about that.